There really should be a law available to hold politicians account for when they say something that on the face of it is dishonest, and to hold the government account when it does not take adequate steps to protect the citizens of its country. I'm talking about comments made by politicians that seem to try to go along with the narrative so that you like them, which appear to be contradictory to things they've previously said, and the government not taking sufficient steps to prevent illegal migration into the country, which arguably is having an effect on the increase in certain types of crime, which many people are upset about. So we're here on Secrets, so some more of my opinions and thoughts here. So please do subscribe to the channel here, as well as my main channel. And I'm going to talk in two halves, really, about this and that, and with a brief mention of a partner for my channel that helps to support me making these videos for you. But please do subscribe. We're here on Secrets. Let's get into it. Now, I'm talking, first of all, about comments by Bridget Phillipson, at least quoted Bridget Phillipson on the Office for Equality and Opportunity, this government account here on X. Now, as you can see, it's community noted, but let's take a look at what she's said to have said first. She says, this is obviously, forgive me, this is following the Supreme Court ruling that woman means biological woman. I mean, who'd have thought? But I've got some thoughts on that as well. It does actually affect some people in a very negative way. And I think it's, well, I've got some thoughts about that. I'll come back to that in a minute. So she's quoted to have said, "We have always supported the protection of single-sex spaces based on biological sex. This ruling brings clarity and confidence for women and service providers such as hospitals, refuges, and sports clubs. Single-sex spaces are protected in law and will always be protected by this government," she says. But as you can see, it's been community noted. This is a great thing on X because it allows people to come together and say, actually, hang on a minute. You've said something different before, or that's not quite true, or here's a source that contradicts what you've said, and that's not quite true. And bearing in mind, this is the current Education Secretary and the Minister for Women and Equalities and the previous Shadow Education Secretary. So hence the community note here, because when she was the Shadow Education Secretary, she's quoted to have said the following by this Telegraph article here. "Trans women with male dangly bits can use female toilets," she said, apparently. She said that they can use female lavatories under Labour's plans to make gender change easier. She said that a trans woman who had a gender recognition certificate would be using female toilets if they'd not had reassignment surgery. The article says these remarks sow fresh confusion over Labour's gender stance as the Tories accused it of planning to dilute women's rights by introducing self-ID. I'll come back to that in a minute because the whole self-ID thing was going the full way of not requiring any certification. Not that that really changes anything, and the Supreme Court judgment says that this effectively just caused more confusion than it did help. But self-ID would essentially obliterate the protection for women in the process and just say anybody can just say, well, I'm a woman, I can go into the female toilets. By the back door. This introduction, it says. And so it says here that Labour had said that it was planning to simplify the process, which it had branded degrading and torturous for trans people by downgrading both requirements. They said that it would keep the requirement for the medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, but this could now be provided by a single clinician, and also downgrade the requirement for evidence of a 2-year reflection period. Now, just stepping aside for a moment, I had a very kind email from someone who is trans and said they support the Supreme Court ruling, but is now left in a very difficult position because the reason this went to the Supreme Court is the Scottish government guidance trying to essentially, in my view, trample all over women's rights in such a way that had they not done this and had they not gone too far, it would not have to have gone to the Supreme Court, and then there would not be this absolute concrete ruling necessary. And the few people that absolutely do really need to just live their lives would have been perfectly fine. And I suspect that most women would probably have been okay with that because there are actually quite a few people, and it is usually the few that ruin it for the many. I think the few people that the Scottish government were trying to please by introducing this guidance that resulted in it going full steam to the Supreme Court, and now it is absolutely concrete, and it is going to affect some people, such as the person that wrote to me. And I've spoken with and had emails and comment exchanges with a number of people that have been in that position, and I genuinely think are in a difficult position because of this. And I think actually there are a lot of people who are going to bend and twist the rules and abuse the system and use all of that for nefarious purposes, via the Scottish guidance, etc. But now with the Supreme Court ruling, this is crystal clear, as crystal clear as it could possibly be. So see my other videos for that. But my point here is we should be able to hold ministers accountable, because Bridget Phillipson here is quoted to say, "We have always supported the protection of single-sex spaces based on biological sex." But that's not true, because if, on the other hand, she's also quoted to say that someone who is biologically male can use the female toilets, then obviously that's not the case. Now, this is posted by this account here, which is the Office for Equality and Opportunity. And it's part of the Cabinet Office of the UK government, and it's quoting Bridget Phillipson as the Minister for Women and Equalities. You cannot make this up. There really ought to be something to hold them accountable, oust them from office or something else, because this, I just think, is not acceptable. As you can see from the comment section here, people have their own views about it as well. People have quoted this all along, and people just don't take what she says seriously. And I think that's a serious problem. But she's not the only one. There's plenty of these. There's too many to even come across. But I'll show you another one here. Anas Sawa, who is the leader of the Scottish Labour and MSP for Glasgow. Now, says here, and I quote, "I've always called for the protection of single-sex spaces on the basis of biological sex." Now, both of these were posted on the 16th of April, the date of the judgment, to say, I agree with the judgment. And they are essentially trying to say, I'm in line with the Supreme Court here. You need to, like me, because I'm in line with the Supreme Court judgment. But again, you can see that it's community noted. So again, you can see that people didn't quite trust it. These community notes are brilliant. People look something up and say, hang on a minute, what about this here? Because that shows maybe what you've said is not quite true. And so this has been added, and it's like a community sourced truth. I don't know if you know how it works. I'm one of the sort of community note contributors. You can add notes, and then other people have to vote on it. And if enough people vote on it that it's useful, it's sourced properly, it's accurate, and it's been checked out, then it's provided to readers to add context to the post, to perhaps correct what's in the post if it's misleading, etc. And accordingly, it says here, as leader of the Scottish Labour Party, he's told his MSPs to vote in favour of Nicola Sturgeon's gender reform, whatever it's called, gender recognition reform Scotland bill and self-ID policy, which would have opened up women's single-sex spaces to biological males. And that's this one here. And you can see that this is the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill. In short, this was the one time when Westminster Parliament said, hang on a minute, no, you can't do that, to Scotland trying to pass a bill. This bill passed, but it did not go to royal assent because it was blocked by the government. I did a video on that way back in whenever it happened, 2022. But you can see here, Scottish Labour, we expand the details here. Sure enough, he's there. Zoom in, scroll down, there's his name. So he voted for this bill, which would support self-ID. So they wouldn't need to go through all the process of gender recognition certificate, etc., etc. And by the way, the law always allowed these service providers to exclude trans from women's toilets, etc., under the Equality Act. But this, I suspect, this would never really have been a problem had the Scottish government never really pushed this guidance to the extent that it did, so that it ended up in the Supreme Court, because it went through the inner outer house and ended up in the Supreme Court. But had it not done that, I suspect most people would never really have been bothered about it, because I suspect the people that using those bathroom facilities would have been genuine and would have been just living their lives, minding their own business. But because it's been pushed, and because there are very few that I suspect this government was trying to please, it's ended up in the Supreme Court, and here we are. But again, the point is, coming full circle, Anas Sauer here says, repeat for emphasis, I've always called for the protection of single-sex bases on the basis of biological sex. But that's demonstrably false if you accept that his vote here for this bill, which supported self-ID, was against exactly what he says here, against single-sex bases on the basis of biological sex. And as I said, this bill passed, but it was blocked from royal assent by using Section 35 of the Scotland Act to block it from becoming law. But it would have reformed the process for legally changing one's gender by removing the requirement for any medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, etc. So no, in my view, based on what I've showed you, you may disagree, you could look it up yourself, but based on what I've showed you, I think that's dishonest because it contradicts his vote. So on that basis, to me, that just doesn't match up, unless he's changed his mind, etc., whatever. But he says here, I've always called for the protection of single-sex bases on the basis of biological sex. And that just patently and demonstrably false, because he voted here, you can see his name here, under the Scottish Labour. His name is there. He voted for this bill, which would change all of that and allow self-ID into those spaces. So I don't think that's acceptable. I think there should be a law that says, hang on, if they've said this and it's demonstrably false, and this is not making a statement of fact here, but if that is the case, it's demonstrably false, I think there should be a law to hold them to account. Likewise, I think there should be a law holding the government to account on not keeping its citizens safe. More about that in just a moment. Don't go away. Now, just to interject with an I told you so, if you remember me talking about your data being on the NHS servers and various software, and that was at risk of being breached, well, here we are, I told you so, because an NHS software provider has been fined £3 million over a data breach. The service provider, Advanced Computer Software Group, has been fined £3 million over a ransomware breach that compromised NHS data and shut down services. The ICO has fined them just over £3 million over security lapses that led to this ransomware attack on the NHS and placed the personal data of 79,000 people at risk. And I'm surprised it is so few people. The company is just one of many software providers providing their services to the NHS across the country and holding your data. Now, holding your data is essential, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, there are ways to protect your data from other companies from getting hold of it in case they've purchased it in some way as a result of one of these leaks. And so to that end, I happily recommend to you the services of Incogni, which is a company that specializes in requiring companies to remove your data from their servers. Even if they've bought it legitimately or they think it's legitimately, they then might just start marketing to you. But if your data falls into the wrong hands, you may then end up the victim of identity theft and all sorts of other things. Incogni will use UK and US law to request and require these companies to remove your data from their servers before it falls into the wrong hands. And as a partner to my channel here, I get you a fantastic discount. That is 60% off, 60% off, using the code BlackBeltSecrets at the link in the description below. Of course, you get a 30-day money-back guarantee as well, but you get access to a dashboard which will show you how many companies confirm they have your data and they are removing your data from their servers. And so each step of the way, making you that little bit safer from identity theft. So grab yourself the 60% discount using the code BlackBeltSecrets at the link in the description below, and you'll be so glad you did so. You will be amazed how many companies have your data. So check that out, and thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video and keeping you all safe. Okay, so let's talk about holding the government to account. Now, some people in the comments on my videos, particularly on my main channel, but sometimes here as well, do subscribe if you don't realize which channel we're on, Black Belt Secrets. Please do subscribe. I have to ask, otherwise people don't do it, and so forgive me for asking, but I do. But a lot of people say, I'm part of the problem, I should hold the government to account. Well, there's not really much I can do. There needs to be a cause of action, and for there to be a cause of action, there needs to be a law upon which the facts and the basis of what's happened is supported by law to bring a claim, which is called a cause of action, to hold them to account. Now, you could argue that the government is being negligent, but in negligence, there is what we call causation. So there's got to be a duty of care, then a breach of that duty of care, and then the breach causes something to cause the damage. Now, the damage is self-evident, the duty of care is self-evident, the breach may well be self-evident, but did it cause the problem? That's where most of these negligence things fall down. And I'll give you an idea. So a lot of people complain about medical negligence. So you go into, let's say you had, I'll give you the example. Let's say someone had a pre-existing condition. They go into care. They try everything they can, but they fail to fix the problem. And they come away and they end up either worse still, or it's a relative and they die, or etc. Then you may want to sue the medical provider for medical negligence. Now, the duty of care is obvious. Any kind of medical care, there is a duty of care. The breach may be obvious. They may have forgotten to do something. They may have done something badly. They may have done the wrong thing. They may have done something they shouldn't have done, etc., etc. The breach may be obvious. But then and obviously the damage might be obvious. There may be lasting damage caused. There might be the patient might die because they did or did not do something that they should or should not have done. But the problem with most of these cases is, did the breach cause this damage or injury or whatever? And that's where most of these fall down. And that's where a case against the government would probably fall down. Did it cause the problem? Well, in the case that I'm going to give you of illegal migration, not necessarily, because it's not necessarily a cause. It's just, they've failed to act and this was going on anyway. They might say, well, they have acted. They might be negligent, but did they cause the problem? Well, no, because there's a break in the chain of causation, because people coming across come in different ways. And if some of those commit crimes and hurt people, did the government cause that to happen? Well, not directly. They do have a duty to sort things out. So that kind of cause of action would be difficult, for example. However, I think there should be some special cause of action against the government to say, you have to do this. Otherwise, you're ousted as a government, because I think this just has to be dealt with. Now, Keir Starmer and his government, I don't criticize them entirely. I mean, they are taking steps, and I do see what they're doing. It's actually quite impressive what they're doing behind the scenes, seizing boats, and they are taking steps to control the gangs, etc. But the result is actually not a good one, because I think what they've missed is in my opinion, the big thing they've missed is they've taken away what is the main deterrent, which was the Rwanda plan. They've heavily criticized it. It may not have been the best plan in the world, but it was certainly a deterrent which was taken away. It appears now that they're coming half a step back. Labour, this is. I think they're coming half a step back by saying the failed asylum seekers we might deport to a third country. So I think that is a half admission that actually we do need some kind of deterrent, but I think that's only for those that have failed asylum. I'll read more about that, and I'll probably do a video about that on my main channel. But looking back at this again, this is quite frankly horrendous. If we look at the numbers here, you don't need to add them up. I'll do it for you. If I've done it correctly, I've done it very quickly, but it's 1,944 that have arrived in a week. Only 2 of those days, there were 0 boats. But otherwise, just shy of 2,000 migrants, and this is probably actually over 2,000 because they'll probably adjust the figures and somewhat in a few days' time. But as it is now, almost 2,000 migrants have arrived. Now, on the one hand, that's just, the best case scenario. Here's the best case scenario. It's going to cost a lot of money to house them, to feed them, to care for them, to check them medically, to keep track of where they are, because they do keep track of where they are to a degree. I'm sure some disappear. I don't know what the statistics are on that, but I'm sure some disappear. They spend a lot of money doing all of this, and so then they go through the asylum process. That takes years. Then some will be granted, some will be refused. How are they going to deport some of those that are refused? They'd have to find out where they come from, and if they don't know where they come from and they don't tell them where they come from, how are they going to get them back where they came from? Virtually impossible. But many of whom will stay, and many of those will be genuine asylum seekers and deserve asylum because they need protection from the country from which they came. All of which they'll have to prove, which again makes it difficult to say, well, how can they claim that they're going to be persecuted where they came from, and without disclosing that, and then if they fail the asylum, then we should know where they came from, etc. So all of this is quite convoluted. But The best case scenario is that this costs the country a lot of money, and we take care of some people that really do need our help. So there is that positive, and I caveat in all my videos, there are people that genuinely need our help. But being less charitable, there are a lot, in my view, in many people's view, that are just economic migrants and are coming here purely because they want the economic benefits of being in the UK, the benefit system, the health system, etc. Now, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that many or most, if not all, are just economic migrants, and worse still, many of them will be with a significant criminal background. I mean, statistically, let's face it, statistically, a lot of them will have a criminal background. We don't know what that is. They are not vetted. It's going to be impossible, likely impossible, to determine what their criminal background is. They're not likely to tell you, by the way, I'm a convicted murderer, but I escaped or something. They're not likely to tell us that, are they? So many of them statistically will have a criminal background. It's unlikely that we know what that is. If that is the case, they may well abscond, run off, escape, and evade detection, and they're off in the hills. And I have to be honest. I'm going to do a balancing thing here. We've taken deliveries from companies. We've worked with companies. We've been out and about, and we've seen people working. And I highly suspect that we've seen migrants working. Obviously, I can't say that with any proof or whatever, but I highly, highly suspect that some people we've met in the last few weeks are migrants. And on the one hand, you might think, they shouldn't be working, they shouldn't be here, they shouldn't be doing this, etc., etc. But on the other hand, I think, well, at least they're working. If they are genuinely working and genuinely being paid and whatever, and as long as they're not actually, taking money at the same time, money for free and working and then not declaring it and paying taxes, etc., etc., that you could look at this in a number of different ways. I mean, I have a bit of a free-flowing thought about this. On the one hand, I think if people were coming here and they were genuinely working, and they were not just given free money and a free load and whatever, then you might have a different thought about it. But there are different ways of looking at this, of course. But what I do think is that there should be some law that holds the government to account for a net failure, in that these, I think the last I looked up, if it's accurate, is over 40, between 40-45% increase on illegal migration since Labour's been in power. And I think that's catastrophic. I think that is a net failure. Given that I've made some comments, positive comments on what I've seen, the videos of the behind the scenes, etc. I know it's a bit of a sales pitch, but I've seen something of what they're doing behind the scenes. It looks positive. It looks like they are genuinely taking the boats away and dismantling the processes and the networks and things like that. Great. But it's a net positive, because almost 2,000 illegal migrants have crossed in a week, in a single week. And that's just because we've had some good weather. And the sun is shining now, and we're coming into some nice weather. We're going through the summer. This is going to continue. So is it going to be a couple of thousand a week? So 8,000-10,000 a month? We're looking at, every few weeks, a small city's worth of people arriving in the UK, completely unvetted, with no checks on their background. We don't know who they are, where they came from, and what they're doing here. Obviously, if they're claiming asylum, they'll tell us that they're claiming asylum and why. But, who's to say they're telling the truth, etc. I think there really ought to be something to hold this government to account for that. And some kind of trigger for emergency to say that, forget which government party you're with, there should be some kind of overall, this is what happens now because this is a net failure of policy. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is purely intended as educational, intelligent, legal commentary of public interest and my personal opinions to share with you of what I've seen from you, what I've seen in articles, what I've read here. And actually, just to come back to it, there is an updated, it's not really updated, but there's an updated statement on the latest statement in response to small boat crossings dated the 16th of April from the Home Office, and doesn't really say anything at all. Now, you'll see, I think today or yesterday it was reported that sadly someone drowned and died who was on a small boat crossing. No one deserves to die. No one deserves to suffer. whether they're supposed to be here or not. I've seen all sorts of awful comments about that, and I don't condone and support those. That should not happen. People shouldn't make those comments. But at the same time, they shouldn't be here, and they should be stopped, and etc. So, but this statement here doesn't really say anything else. It says the French working to change their operational policy so that the maritime forces can intervene in shallow waters in the coming weeks. Maybe we'll see some change. Maybe this is the update, and maybe they are going to make some changes. But I said that a good few weeks ago. I said, they made a similar statement a few weeks ago, and I remember saying in my video, maybe this is a positive sign. Maybe we're going to see some change. Maybe this is the thing that's going to suddenly end all these crossings. And there were a few days that there were 0 crossings, but actually that was really bad weather. And now we've got almost 2,000 in a week, which I believe is a record. So I see the positive comment, the updated policy news statement here, but having seen them before, I don't hold very much hope in that this is actually going to change anything. But we'll have to see what happens. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below. But overall, I think there should be really something that holds these ministers to account. These were just a couple. Let me know if you found other examples. I can talk about those as well. Let me know what you think about the whole thing. And as always, be nice to each other. Be polite. Leave me your thoughts and comments below. Make sure you subscribe. And thanks for watching.